On the 30th of October, 1888, inside King Lobengula's royal capital at Bulawayo, 3 European businessmen placed a document before one of Southern Africa's most powerful rulers. There were no soldiers at the gates, no cannons pointed toward the palace, no declaration of war. Only paper, ink, and carefully chosen words. Lobengula believed he was granting a small group of foreigners limited permission to search for gold within his kingdom. He did not believe he was surrendering his land. He did not believe he was giving away his authority. And he certainly did not believe he was signing the death warrant of his nation. But the English document in front of him said far more than the promises spoken inside the room. Hidden within its legal language were exclusive mineral rights, enormous commercial powers, and a clause allowing the men to take almost any action they considered necessary. Lobengula placed his mark upon the paper. Charles Rudd took the document and carried it south to Cecil Rhodes. Within a year, that single agreement would help Rhodes secure a royal charter from Queen Victoria. That charter would create a private army, unleash an invasion, and lay the foundations of a territory that would eventually bear Rhodes's name. A kingdom was not conquered that day with bullets. It was trapped with a signature. This is the story of the Rudd Concession, the secret gold deal that stole a kingdom and created Rhodesia. To understand why Lobengula accepted any agreement at all, we must first understand the danger closing in around him. By 1888, the Ndebele kingdom stood at the center of a growing struggle for southern Africa. Lobengula ruled from Bulawayo, exercising power across Matabeleland and claiming influence over territories extending into what Europeans called Mashonaland. But beyond his borders, the world was changing rapidly. Diamonds had already made men like Cecil Rhodes enormously wealthy. Gold discoveries in the Transvaal had transformed dusty settlements into booming mining centers. Now prospectors were looking north, convinced that an even greater fortune lay beneath Lobengula's land. They came carrying maps, gifts, and promises. Some asked for permission to dig. Others wanted land, trade routes, or political influence. British agents feared Boer expansion from the south. The Portuguese were advancing from the east. Missionaries, hunters, and concession seekers moved between African courts, each claiming to be a friend while competing for access. Lobengula understood that these visitors were dangerous. He had watched foreigners turn small agreements elsewhere into permanent settlements. He knew that once armed Europeans entered a territory in large numbers, removing them could become almost impossible. But refusing everyone also carried risks. A rejected concession hunter could simply approach one of Lobengula's rivals. A foreign government could accuse him of hostility. An alliance with one European power might be the only way to prevent several others from forcing their way into his kingdom. So Lobengula attempted to control the pressure. He delayed decisions, questioned visitors, and forced them to wait while he consulted his senior advisors. He hoped that granting carefully restricted rights to one group might keep dozens of competing adventurers outside his borders. This was not the decision of a foolish king dazzled by European gifts. It was the calculation of a ruler trapped between rival empires, trying to preserve his kingdom without provoking the forces gathering around it. And somewhere far to the south, Cecil Rhodes was preparing to turn that calculation against him. While Lobengula struggled to keep foreign fortune hunters under control, Cecil Rhodes was building a vision far larger than any single mine. By 1888, Rhodes had already become one of Southern Africa's most powerful businessmen. Diamonds had made him enormously wealthy, but wealth alone was no longer enough. He wanted territory. Rhodes dreamed of expanding British influence northward across the African continent. He believed new lands could provide minerals, farms, markets, and strategic routes, while preventing Boer republics and rival European powers from occupying them first. But there was a problem. The British government did not want to pay for another expensive colonial conquest. Sending soldiers, constructing roads, and governing distant territories would require money, manpower, and political responsibility. Rhodes offered a cheaper solution. Instead of Britain conquering the land directly, a private company could do it in the name of commerce. The company would attract investors, send settlers, raise its own armed police, and administer whatever territory it acquired. Britain would gain influence without carrying the full cost, while Rhodes and his partners would control the profits. But to obtain royal approval for such a company, Rhodes needed something that looked legitimate. He needed proof that the African ruler controlling the territory had willingly granted him extensive rights. That was why Lobengula mattered. Rhodes did not simply want permission for a few men to dig for gold. He wanted a document broad enough to persuade officials in London that his company had a lawful reason to enter the kingdom. Gold was the attraction presented to Lobengula. Political control was the prize Rhodes intended to carry away. And so, while Lobengula believed he was negotiating with miners, he was actually facing the opening move of a colonial project. Rhodes did not yet need an army to take the kingdom. First, he needed a signature that could make everything that followed appear legal. Rhodes chose his negotiators carefully. These were not ordinary prospectors searching for a place to dig. They were men selected to overcome Lobengula's resistance and return with a document powerful enough to satisfy London. Charles Rudd led the mission. He was Rhodes's trusted business partner, experienced in mining negotiations, and fully aware that failure could allow a rival syndicate to secure the concession first. Beside him was Rochfort Maguire, an Oxford-educated lawyer and one of Rhodes's former university companions. Maguire brought the polished appearance of respectability that Rhodes wanted attached to the agreement. The third man was Francis Ndebele Thompson, a seasoned frontier operator with years of experience dealing with African workers and communities. Unlike Rudd and Maguire, Thompson understood how patience, familiarity, and personal persuasion could open doors that money alone could not. When the three men reached Bulawayo in September 1888, Lobengula did not welcome their proposal with enthusiasm. He made them wait while he questioned their intentions, consulted his Izinduna, and listened to competing concession seekers. Days became weeks. Rudd grew restless, but Rhodes ordered him not to return without the agreement. Every delay increased the danger that another group might offer Lobengula better terms and destroy Rhodes's plans. The king repeatedly asked the question that mattered most: how many Europeans would enter his country? He feared that a handful of miners would soon become hundreds of settlers, followed by soldiers and officials. To calm those fears, Rudd's party reportedly gave important oral assurances. Only about 10 white men would come. They would not mine near Ndebele settlements, and everyone working for them would obey Lobengula's laws. Missionary Charles Helm helped interpret the negotiations. Lobengula trusted him, and his presence gave the conversation an appearance of honesty that the king might not have extended to Rudd alone. But the promises being spoken were not the same as the powers being written down. The restriction on the number of miners did not appear in the final document. Neither did the promise to avoid towns or the assurance that the newcomers would remain completely subject to Lobengula's authority. That created two versions of the agreement before it had even been signed. One existed in the words Lobengula heard inside his royal enclosure. The other existed in the English sentences Charles Rudd intended to carry out of the kingdom. Lobengula was negotiating over how a few miners would behave. Rudd was negotiating for control over the mineral wealth of an entire nation.
By the time the negotiations reached their final stage, two very different agreements existed inside the same room. One was the agreement Lobengula believed he was making. The other was the agreement Charles Rudd had written in English. In Lobengula's understanding, a small number of miners would be allowed to search for gold under strict conditions. They would not take his land. They would not challenge his authority. They would remain guests inside a kingdom that still belonged to him. The written concession told a far more dangerous story. It granted Rudd and his partners complete and exclusive control over all metals and minerals within Lobengula's dominions. That meant no rival miner could enter without their approval. It also meant Lobengula could not grant similar rights to anyone else, even though the land and the kingdom remained his. The most alarming clause gave the concessionaires permission to take whatever actions they considered necessary to obtain the minerals. Those words were broad enough to justify roads, camps, armed guards, machinery, and the arrival of many more Europeans. In exchange, Lobengula was promised £100 every month. He was also offered 1,000 rifles, ammunition, and a steamboat on the Zambezi, or money instead of the vessel. To a ruler surrounded by foreign rivals, rifles could appear to offer protection. But the weapons that seemed capable of strengthening his kingdom were attached to a document designed to weaken his control over it. The agreement did not openly say that Lobengula was surrendering his throne. It did not declare that his territory had become British land, or that Cecil Rhodes now owned the kingdom. That was what made the document so effective. It granted just enough power to open the door, while hiding the full consequences behind the language of mining and commerce. Lobengula believed he was controlling where a few foreigners could dig. Rudd knew he was securing a monopoly that could be presented in London as proof of legitimate authority. One side was negotiating over gold. The other was creating the legal foundation for occupation. Charles Rudd carried away the language of empire. On the 30th of October, 1888, after weeks of pressure, delays, and argument, the document was finally placed before King Lobengula. The moment appeared simple. A ruler, a sheet of paper, and several witnesses gathered inside the royal enclosure at Bulawayo. But Lobengula could not personally read the English words that would later be used against him. He depended on translators, explanations, and the trust he placed in men who claimed the agreement had been fairly described. Missionary Charles Helm played a crucial role. He had lived near the Ndebele court, spoke local languages, and was regarded by Lobengula as someone whose word carried moral authority. Helm interpreted the negotiations and later signed a written statement declaring that the concession had been fully explained. His endorsement gave Rudd something almost as valuable as the king's mark: the appearance that an independent witness had confirmed the agreement was honest. Yet Lobengula remained deeply uneasy. He delayed, questioned the men again, and refused to treat the document as a casual commercial arrangement. His senior counselors were also suspicious. Several of them opposed the deal, and none added their own marks beside the king's. Rudd understood that the negotiation was close to collapse. He had spent weeks in Bulawayo and every passing day increased the chance that a rival concession hunter would reach the king with a different offer. The pressure inside the royal enclosure intensified. Rudd's party repeated its assurances that the agreement concerned mining, not the surrender of land or kingship. Finally, Lobengula placed his mark on the document. There was no celebration, no public declaration that the kingdom had changed hands, and no announcement that Rhodes now possessed political authority. To Lobengula, the agreement remained limited by the promises spoken during the negotiations. To Charles Rudd, the only version that mattered was the version written in English. Rudd left Bulawayo carrying the concession southward toward Cecil Rhodes. Maguire and Thompson remained behind, surrounded by a court that was already beginning to question what had truly happened. The ink had barely dried, but the meaning of the document was already changing as it traveled farther from the man who had signed it. Inside Bulawayo, it was still described as permission to search for gold. In Rhodes's hands, it would become evidence that an empire had been invited north. The men around Lobengula had watched a king approve a mining arrangement. Cecil Rhodes was about to receive the foundation of a colonial state. The concession had left Bulawayo, but rumors of its meaning soon returned. Newspapers and concession hunters began describing it as something much larger than permission for a few men to search for gold. According to these reports, Lobengula had placed the mineral wealth of his entire kingdom under the control of Cecil Rhodes. Some even spoke as though the king had given away the country itself. Inside the royal capital, fear turned into anger. Lobengula's advisors demanded to know how a restricted mining arrangement had become a claim powerful enough to threaten their independence. The king ordered the concession to be examined again. The English language on the paper did not contain the limits he believed had been promised during the negotiations. There was no restriction to 10 miners. There was no clear protection against large settlements, armed forces, or the arrival of thousands of foreigners. Lobengula now understood the danger. The spoken agreement, he remembered, could not protect him from the written agreement Rhodes would present to the British government. The crisis demanded someone to blame. Lotche, the senior advisor who had encouraged the king to accept the rifles and approve the concession, was accused of helping foreigners endanger the kingdom. Lotche was executed. Many members of his household and extended family were reportedly killed with him, although surviving accounts disagree over the exact number. It was a brutal act, born from fear, political pressure, and the desperate need to prove that the king had not knowingly surrendered his people's future. But killing Lotche could not destroy the concession. Charles Rudd had already carried the document beyond Lobengula's reach, while Rhodes was preparing to use it before officials in London. Francis Thompson, who had remained in Bulawayo to protect Rhodes's interests, realized that the anger could soon turn toward him. He fled the royal capital, leaving behind a court consumed by suspicion. Lobengula attempted to reject the interpretation being placed upon his mark. He insisted that he had never agreed to surrender his country and had never authorized an unlimited invasion of miners and settlers. But Rhodes possessed the written document, and in the imperial world surrounding Lobengula, the English words on that paper carried more power than the king's memory of what had been promised. Lobengula could condemn the agreement, he could punish the men who advised him to accept it, but he could not catch the paper, already traveling toward London.
Lobengula knew that denouncing the concession inside Bulawayo would not be enough. If Rhodes intended to use the British crown, then the king would appeal directly to the woman whose authority Rhodes claimed to represent. He sent 2 senior envoys,
Babayane and Machete across the sea to Britain. Their mission was to meet Queen Victoria, explain the danger surrounding the Ndebele kingdom, and discover whether Britain truly supported the men acting in her name. The journey itself revealed how seriously Lobengula viewed the crisis. Rather than wait for European officials to speak on his behalf, he attempted to establish direct diplomatic contact with the British monarch. The envoys reached England in early 1889 and were received at Windsor Castle. They carried Lobengula's request for protection against foreign encroachment and asked the Queen to send an official representative to his kingdom. But the response offered reassurance without real protection. The British government warned Lobengula against granting away his country, yet it did not stop Rhodes from using the concession to advance his plans. Lobengula later sent another message, declaring that he had never intended to surrender all his mineral rights. He and his councillors rejected the sweeping interpretation being placed upon the document, but the king's protest moved slowly toward London. Rhodes's agents were already there, gathering political support, influencing newspapers, and presenting the concession as proof that their expansion had been authorized. Lobengula believed the Queen might restrain the businessmen acting in her name. Rhodes understood that those businessmen could help expand her empire. By the time Lobengula's strongest protest reached British officials, the machinery behind the charter was already moving. The king had appealed to the highest authority in the British Empire, but the empire had more to gain from Rhodes's document than from Lobengula's warning. While Lobengula protested, Cecil Rhodes presented the concession in London as proof that his company possessed legitimate rights north of the Limpopo. British officials saw an opportunity. Rhodes would finance the expansion, recruit the settlers, and carry the risks, while Britain extended its influence without paying for a full military conquest. On October 29, 1889, Queen Victoria granted a royal charter to the British South Africa Company. The charter gave Rhodes's company extraordinary powers. It could make treaties, administer territory, establish courts, create a police force, and protect its commercial interests with armed men. The Rudd Concession had not formally transferred Lobengula's kingdom to Rhodes, but it helped create the appearance that the company's arrival had been authorized by the ruler whose independence it would soon destroy. A mining agreement had now become the foundation of a government. Private investors could act like colonial officials, and company employees could enter African territory beneath the authority of the British Crown. Lobengula's objections were pushed aside. The version of the agreement that mattered in London was not the one he believed had been spoken in Bulawayo. It was the English document Rhodes held in his hands. A mark became a concession. The concession became a royal charter, and the charter gave Cecil Rhodes the machinery he needed to move north. In 1890, the British South Africa Company sent the Pioneer Column north into Mashonaland. Protected by armed police, the column built roads, raised forts, and established settlements across territory Rhodes claimed his charter allowed him to occupy. The vast gold fields investors expected did not immediately appear, but by then, the company had already gained something more valuable than gold: land, settlers, and political control. Tension with the Ndebele kingdom continued to grow. In 1893, disputes were used to justify war between Lobengula's forces and the British South Africa Company. Ndebele warriors fought with courage, but they faced rifles, artillery, and Maxim guns capable of cutting down charging soldiers in devastating numbers. Within months, Bulawayo had fallen. Lobengula fled north as company forces pursued him, and he died early the following year under circumstances that remain uncertain. The kingdom he had tried to protect was absorbed into company-controlled territory. By 1895, that expanding colonial possession was being called Rhodesia, named after Cecil Rhodes. The concession had promised gold. Instead, it delivered forts, settlers, war, and the destruction of an independent kingdom. What began as permission for a few miners ended with an entire country carrying the name of the man who planned its takeover.
The Rudd Concession did not hand Cecil Rhodes a kingdom in one sentence. It gave him something more useful, a document he could present as permission. That document became a royal charter. The charter created a company with the powers of a government, the weapons of an army, and the ambition of an empire. Lobengula believed he had allowed limited mining under his authority. Rhodes used the agreement to open the door to settlement, war, and conquest. The greatest prize was never only the gold beneath the ground. It was control over the land above it. A promise became a contract. A contract became a charter. A charter became an invasion. And an African kingdom was eventually renamed after the man who helped destroy its independence. The Rudd Concession was not simply a bad business deal. It was one of history's darkest betrayals. Subscribe to History's Darkest Deals for more true stories of secret agreements, political deception, and the bargains that changed the world.